Hey everyone, today's video is called Quick Analysis Techniques for Multifamily Apartment Buildings. So we're going to talk about some quick techniques. They're rough around the edges, but professionals love to use them. And the reason being is that they save a lot of time. If you can go through, underwrite a number of deals very quickly, means you can see a lot more deals and you're not wasting time. So keep that in mind as we go through these. Obviously, we don't want to be underwriting every single deal and putting them through complex spreadsheets, especially when we don't know a lot of the information off the building. If we're looking at deals that are off market or perhaps there's limited information, it's very tough for us to put together an accurate underwriting model. So we use some of these techniques to quickly analyze deals, but also to be able to compare deals apples to apples. And you'll see what we mean by that in a minute. But let's go through the list of three different techniques you can use. The first one is called gross rent multiplier. Now, personally, I do not use this at all, but it follows a trend of some of the other ones we'll go through in a minute. But basically, we're looking at value of the property. And when we say value, we typically mean purchase price, list price, whatever is the entry price we're looking at of a building. And then we're dividing that by the total annual rent. So obviously, the higher the annual rent, the lower the value we're actually going to, sorry, the lower the GRM we're actually going to get. So a lower GRM, maybe 4 to 7, is more favorable than if it was like 8, 9, 10, etc. But to me, it's a little arbitrary. It doesn't really mean much, but it's still a good, useful tool. You see GRM used oftentimes in listings, especially on the MLS when they're talking about smaller product. Uh, but that is GRM. The next one is one that I really like a lot. It's called the 1% rule. And what this means mathematically, total monthly rent over the value. And you can times this by 100 to get a percentage. This is actually a pretty big one on bigger pockets, or for individual investors that are starting out. But I think this is a really good one, applicable for any size multifamily. And really, what we're trying to achieve here is a metric that takes away all of the other fluff of expenses and taxes and all of that kind of stuff, and just gets down to the brass tacks of a deal. How much is it making in rent? Now, this is a common theme between all of these, is that we're trying to simplify the deal. The less variables we add, then the better we can have a comparison between deals. So for instance, let's go through an example. A very simple example, we have a 10 unit building, and we each unit is $1,000 per month. So we have total $10,000 per month of the property. Now it's listed for $1 million. Now, if we do the math, we do a $10,000 divided by the value, which is 1 million, and we get exactly 1%. Now that's not a coincidence. I made it to be that way. Why we call it the 1% rule, though, is because a rule of thumb for newer investors is if you can get the rents to hit that 1%, then generally you're going to be pretty well off cash flow wise. So that's kind of like a bit of a moving target. Um, but if you can get it to 1%, we're looking good. Now, that doesn't mean that this deal is fantastic. Let's lock it up and buy it right now. But it means, hey, it cash flows pretty well just from a rental basis. Let's explore this deal more. It might end up that the taxes are very, very high. And so therefore it isn't actually a great building. But it means that we can actually invest time to underwrite this deal, versus if we say we got it was at 0.5%, which would be very low. We might say, hey, this deal isn't even worth underwriting and going through that entire process. It would just be a waste of time. So this gives you a quick estimate up front about how well a property is cash flowing. Now, this is filmed in November of 2024. I will say the past few years in multifamily, prices have been very high. So, since the prices have been very high, even though rents have also gone up, it is very hard to hit that 1% rule. Uh, Across most properties across the country. Maybe you're having to look at some, serious, cheap Class C product to get anywhere near 1%. But back in more normal times, you may have seen 1% as a good benchmark to reach. Now you might be saying, I did this on a handful of deals, and I was looking at 0.65 to 0.7 percent. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Again, it allowed me to compare apples to apples, and I saw that a lot of these deals were falling within that 0.05% range between 0.65 and zero point 0.7. And then one deal came along and it was at 0.82, and I said, hey, this one's actually cash flowing pretty well compared to its value. It was around the same quality, around the same area, so I said, hey, this one might be worth looking into. So that is how you use the 1% rule, and you can use it very quickly. So I'm a big fan of the 1% rule. And then the last one we have here is kind of a similar play on, and I use both of them interchangeably, is the 60% NOI rule. So how it's similar, we're again using gross rents as the main factor here, except this time we're going to come up with an NOI. Now, why do we choose 60% of NOI? Oh, actually, you know what? First, I'll go through what the formula is. The formula is total annual rent. So unlike the 1% rule, we're doing total annual rent. So for this case, back to our 10 units, 1,000 per month per unit, we're at 10,000 a month. But this time we have to times it by 12 to get the annual rent. So now we're actually 10,000 times 12, we're at 120,000. So we'll take that 120,000 and we will times it by zero point 0.6. So I'm going to do it on my phone here. I'm going to do 120,000 times 0 0.6, and that gives me 72,000. Might be reversed there, but 72,000 is it. And we're calling that our NOI. We're saying that we're taking the expenses out and we're left with 72,000 NOI. Now we can apply a market cap rate to that. We can say maybe the market cap rate in this specific area is 6.5 cap. So I'm going to divide it by 0.065, and I'm left with $1,107,000. So I can say if I'm going to buy in at a 6.5 cap, I'm approximately looking at $1.1 million. Now, if you're wondering to yourself, hey, this seems kind of rough. You're not really including any specific expenses. You're not, following any typical guidelines. You'd be correct. This is pretty rough around the edges. However, again, what it does is it gives us a quick check of where this property sits on the scale of potentially good value and worth underwriting further, or if the numbers are just completely crazy that we're not even going to touch it. So 60%, what this is really saying is that NOI is about 60% of the annual rents. This can vary, obviously. It could be 50%, it could be 70%, but I've seen a lot of properties actually tend towards this 60% mark. And if you think about it, expenses, they can vary wildly, but for the most part, they end up balancing each other out. So what I mean by that is, look at property taxes. For instance, if you're looking in the same area, property taxes are more or less going to be applied the same. Same for insurance. Water usage and electricity usage is typically going to be the same building to building, per square foot. So we're going to say, yeah, one might be more expensive, one might be less expensive, but overall they're going to naturally balance themselves out a bit. And this is also known as the expense ratio. So we're using an expense ratio of 40%, but NOI equals 60% of the total annual gross rents. So again, we're just using a quick check method here, and we might say it might be listed for, say this example is listed for 1.2 million. We might say, hey, that's not too far off the what our quick calculation was of 1.1 million. Maybe it's a little bit overpriced, or maybe there's something in the deal that's making the expenses a little lower. Maybe there's some extra value add opportunity. So this might be a deal that is worth analyzing more. So the idea behind it is we're kind of cutting out the expenses. Again, expenses can vary. Some people may put lighter expenses just to show their property is potentially worth more. But we're ruling out all of that variability and we're just focusing on something that is pretty easy to determine. No one should be screwing up rents. Like a rent, someone at $1,000 rent should be on the rent roll correctly. And we're taking that information which is known and we're comparing it to other investments. So that is the idea behind these techniques. We're trying to limit the amount of variables involved, and really rent is the most important one which we want to use. So those are the three techniques: GRM, the 1% rule, and the 60% NOI rule. Let me know if you have any questions. Other than that, we will see you next week. Thank you.